This is Jody with All True Crime ASMR. I just wanted to thank you all so much for your support and giving me this wonderful outlet to talk about true crime and discuss it with you all. I love it. It really makes me so happy after working a long day. It's like the one thing that honestly, it winds me down so I can sleep. Tonight we'll be talking about the Springfield Three. So let's talk about this case. Thank you for all your support and views. Subscribers, thank you. Likes, comments, it means so much to me. I made some new playlists too with some of my favorite ASMR artists. And so those are in my playlist, in my channels that I watch. So hopefully I can spread the word as to I really like to listen to, because I think that it is good to share if you're able to other people's work as well. It's like, it is truly like being an artist. And everybody has personal preferences, and sometimes you like listening to one because their story, but maybe their voice, maybe they're more relaxed at night. I don't know, but I really am enjoying. I've watched, I have read books on these, and it really has always boggled my mind. There's so many theories from a serial killer to friend to, even to her son, having done it. He was an alcoholic, but, it just, not having their bodies has been the biggest problem. So let's start from the beginning. If you haven't heard it, you're in for a treat. If you have, I hope you find a little bit, some different perspective, or just enjoy my voice and take a nice deep sleep. So what happened in hometown USA, where Springfield, Missouri is, from the most populated Springfield, Massachusetts, to the home of Lincoln in Illinois, 35 states in the U.S. have a Springfield or related name, such as Springfield Township, Michigan. The one in Missouri is in the southwest corner of the Show Me State, with a population of only about 150,000. It rests in the beautiful Ozarks, and the Ozarks are so beautiful, but it's up in the Ozark Plateau where nothing changes quickly but the weather, which is true. Springfield has been known to say that one can experience all 4 seasons in 1 week. The Queen City of the Ozarks is a family stop on Route 66 between St. Louis and Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was the boyhood home to Brad Pitt. Bob Barker went to college at Drury piece of American pie. American pie. A little piece of the American dream with a white picket fence. It's a community where people feel safe, or have felt safe. They should feel safe. They used to feel safe. They were supposed to be safe. This wasn't supposed to happen in Springfield. The Springfield Three put on a warm day in June. Unfortunately, it did occur. June 7th, 1992, is the day Springfield changed forever. It is the scar that never altered its psyche. It is the scar that forever altered its psyche. It marks a day of lost innocence. Lost innocence. Nearly 30 years later. You know, just like how we all talk about it, 30 years later, we bring it up, we get chills, it's almost as if somebody had cut away at the heart of our American culture, because this was the ideological, place to live. It was beautiful, quiet, it was safe. It was just perfect. It was the American dream town that people think of in the movies, in the winter, the snow, and the straight out of a storybook. So 30 years later, these three women are still missing. To any long-time area resident, chances are they will recall in great deal what they were doing and how they reacted when they heard the news. The day before the graduation, and this is so sad, at Kickapoo High School, 19-year-old Susie Streeter and her friend Stacy McCall, along with nearly 700 other graduates, walked down the aisle. Janice McCall and her husband Stu were in attendance, along with siblings and other relatives, to watch their daughter. Stacy, a great student, had plans to attend the hometown university, walk down the aisle. What was then called Southwest Missouri State is where she was going to go to college. Her best friend, Susie Streeter, was considering following her mother's career path as a cosmetologist. Both were looking forward to relaxing and having a fun summer before their new journey in life. Cheryl Levitt, Susie's mother, was in the audience that day to watch her only daughter graduate. She was both enthusiastic and a little melancholy, a little sad. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Her daughter's rite of passage, according to a friend she spoke with that night. From all accounts, Cheryl and Susie were very close. Raising her daughter had not been easy after her divorce, but she never complained. Susie meant everything to her, especially after she and her 28-year-old son, Bert, had a falling out years earlier. Because before he had a drinking problem, he was volatile at times, and Cheryl and her son often got into loud arguments that led her finally to throwing her son out of the house. And if you see me looking down, I'm just looking down at my notes. So on graduation night, what happened? There were celebrations and parties at everybody's house, and they were kind of just, running around like you do when you're a senior in high school. And, it's interesting because that's Susie wasn't a bad kid, but she was just a little bit more wild, that's all. She hung out with a little rowdier crowd, and, making more prone to making bad choices. And I mean, come on, we weren't perfect, and I had my really good friends and my other friends that, we all grew up and everything was fine. But, some of them were just made not bad choices, but not as good of choices as they could have. So, one of those boyfriends and two of his friends had been accused of vandalizing mausoleums at a local cemetery. Susie, it was said, had information about the crime and was considering testifying against the three boys, Dustin Ricala, Michael Clay, and Joseph Rydell. Susie and Stacy had been friends since childhood, but had drifted apart in high school. They appeared to have little in common and were going in different directions in life. But the end of high school has a way of returning old friends together. And at the end of the night, end of the graduation, the two were hanging out again. They made plans together that included spending time with other friends, Janelle included. Janelle and her boyfriend, Mike Henson, had planned to drive to Branson later that night along with Susie and Stacy. And rent a hotel room like they had said to get to the water park the next day. But they decided against the drive. And that was probably a good choice because there was probably a lot of kids and there was probably going to be more drinking, and probably it's best to stay where you are. But instead, they called Stacy's mother to tell her that she'd most likely spend the night at Janelle's house. That made her mother happy. She wasn't in favor of driving to Branson that late at night, and I can't blame her, I would too. She told her daughter she loved her and had fun. She would have never guessed that would be the last time that she ever got to talk to her daughter, Stacy. And with all of these stories, that is so true. And it breaks my heart when I think about that, because I am the single parent of a daughter. Lucy also called her mother to tell her that night that she planned to stay over at Janelle's house as well. The three girls left the graduation party close to 2 a.m. and headed back to Janelle's. But with relatives from out of town, there's just so many people there, and there wasn't room for all of the friends to stay comfortably, and they really wanted a good night's sleep the next day. So the girls decided to go back to Susie's house, and Susie had received, a king-size waterbed as a graduation present, so from her mother, and the girls agreed they'd probably be more comfortable there. I mean, who wouldn't be? I love my king-size bed. I don't care if I'm single. So Janelle was invited too, but declined. She thought it best to stay home, with her family. So, and it would be impolite because all of her relatives were there, and, so she just said, it was no big deal. They all thought they'd meet up with her in the morning, early. Susie and Stacy had driven separate cars to Janelle's house, therefore, so Stacy had followed Susie to her house when they left, so Stacy is not following Susie. Susie's mother, Cheryl, had spent the evening at home watching television and talking to a good friend on the phone about varnishing furniture and hanging wallpaper. She and her daughter had moved into the house, 1717 East Delmar Street, only 2 months earlier. So the brand new house, it's a modest home just off the busy Glenstone Avenue, on the edge of the old money section of the Roundtree neighborhood. The home needed some upgrades, and Cheryl was focused on the task. Her friend said Cheryl sounded normal, even upbeat, and never indicated that anything seemed amiss. Their conversation ended around 11:30 p.m. Then girls arrive at Cheryl Levitt's house, but it is assumed they went straight there after leaving Janelle's. Whether they went right to bed or went out again is a matter of controversy. I don't think they did, because the girls' purses were found there, and Janelle's purse. So Stacy and Cheryl's purse. So it's, I'm sorry, not Janelle's, Stacy and Cheryl and then the other gal, Susie. So 3 S's. That never even crossed my mind before. Anyway. Or I'm just tired, one of two. So, I just don't see that, these girls are tired. They want to go to the water park in the morning. I can remember being that age, and even though we loved to go out late or whatever, we never, if we had somewhere cool to go the next day, we wanted to at least go to a friend's house and, hang out. A server at George's Steakhouse, a popular 24-hour diner, Glenstone, about a mile north from Cheryl's home, told police the 3 women ate breakfast at the restaurant during the early mornings of June 7th. She claims Susie was intoxicated, slurring her words and walking erratically. She said Cheryl Levitt was trying to settle her daughter down. Cheryl, it was reported, was a regular customer at George's, and the server recognized her. No one else at the restaurant corroborated the server's story, so who knows if he's really telling the truth. Maybe he just wanted the media attention. Like I said, be careful what you read and what do you believe what people say. So, but apparently, according to the server, when the 3 women left, they were talking to 3 men outside the restaurant. But nobody can corroborate this, so nobody is saying, okay, yeah, this happened. Now, if it's a 24-hour diner and it's graduation night, I'm sure it's a little bit busy. And I'm sure it's, she wasn't the only one a little bit buzzed or even drunk. Later that morning, Janelle began calling Susie's house around 8 a.m. 8 a.m. She was up and ready to drive to Branson for their day at Whitewater. No one answered the phone, and they wouldn't be ever answering the phone again. Janelle, though, she has no idea what is going on, and she's seeing things. Okay, it's really early. I'm gonna let them sleep in. They're probably tired. They maybe went out, after they dropped me off, and who knows. So she's assuming the best, like every normal day before that. However, she hadn't heard from her friend by noon, and she and her boyfriend, Mike Henson, decided to drive over Susie's. It was clear, sunny morning, temperatures hovering around 80 degrees. A perfect day for the water park. Janelle was a little upset that the girls were sleeping in so late. She even wondered if they had taken off without her. So she's a little mad at this point, a little pissed, so she probably hops out of the car. And, they're in the circle driveway. All 3 cars are there. Then she realizes, she says, well, that's really odd. They must be home. So now she's really mad. So Janelle jumps out of the car barefoot and approached the house. Something shiny on the front porch caught her eye, and the broken glass that had fallen from where somebody had broken into the house was there beneath her feet. She walked carefully as she noticed the cut glass so it would not cut her. Mike spotted the light fixture to the right of the glass door. The glass door cover had been broken, and that was the second thing that was shattered. On the porch, odd, they thought. But the light bulb was not broken. That was even herself in, but as she was letting herself in, she hesitated because she thought this was particularly strange. She knew that Susie had mentioned on several other occasions how concerned her mother was about security ever since her brother had left. And they were having trouble with Bart, so she always locked the doors and all the windows. She is constantly bugging me to do the same, cried Susie to her friend. So Janelle's thinking, this is weird. The broken light, the broken glass, everything is really starting to feel strange. Janelle pushed the door open and stepped back because she and Mike both yelled Susie and Stacy's name, hoping to wake them up, so she's probably like a little pissed. Susie, Stacy, where the hell are you? Get up. However, when there was no answer, Janelle walked slowly inside. Her heart was racing. Her breath was being held. Then she saw Cheryl's Yorkie, Cinnamon, lunge at her, barking and very, very anxious. She petted the dog a few seconds to calm it down, but in the living room the TV set and light on the table were on. The room was a bit cluttered but looked undisturbed, like there hadn't been a struggle or anything. They continued walking through the house, calling their friends. There was no response from the three women. There was things piled on the steps in front of Susie's sunken bedroom. Car keys and a pack of cigarettes were out. That was what started Janelle's feeling uneasy, because Cheryl was a chain smoker. She wouldn't go even next door without a cigarette. She wouldn't go anywhere without her cigarettes. So Janelle has goosebumps. She has that weird tingly sense up her back. She is feeling very, very much like something is not right. And what is going on? She could understand walking someplace or going, someone else's house and leaving their purses, but not her cigarettes or the car keys. So, and I guess Susie smoked too, like her mother, and that was even stranger, because why would they both leave their cigarettes there? So now the door to Susie's room was open. They walked inside. It appeared the two girls had gotten ready for bed. Sheets on the waterbed were messy. Even evidence of washed off makeup was in the bathroom. Susie had folded her shorts, placed them on the shoes beside Susie's waterbed. So the girls had gotten into bed. So this, up for controversy that they had left. These are the things that tell me that they were in bed. Their shoes were off, their purses were there, their cigarettes were there, their clothes had, they had changed into their night clothes and brushed their teeth, washed their faces, and the clothes they had worn the night before were on, her dresser folded. So Janelle and Mike went into Cheryl's bedroom. The door was open, cigarette butts were in the ashtray, reading glasses and a half-empty pack of Pall Malls was on the nightstand again. This made Janelle feel like something is wrong. The covers on the bed were rolled down and an open book was lying on the bed. It looked as if they had been there and just been there. Janelle would say later, there was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that looked out of place. There was one small thing that Janelle found odd. The curtain in Susie's bedroom was partially opened. It wasn't a big deal. She would think later, and but all the other curtains, every one of them were closed tightly in the house. Whatever Janelle and Mike saw did not bother them enough to contact the police. There was nothing in that house that made them think anything sinister had happened. There was no blood, there was nothing a mess, there was no struggle. Whoever came in must have known them, because they got out of bed. They got ready for bed, they got undressed, they got in their night clothes. I mean, think about this in a way that, say, think about it in their perspective. Everything looked totally normal except for that little window. Not window, but blind was open, or curtain. Now that would tell me, if I'm thinking about this, that would tell me that Susie had gotten up and she actually looked through the window because she was thinking somebody's outside. And she was like, that's what I would do. So if everything was normal looking, but the one window curtain out of all the window curtains in the house were open, Susie or somebody, whether it be Cheryl or Stacy, would had to have opened that slightly to look outside to see if anybody was coming, because nothing sinister, I don't think, ever happened in the house. Mike went back to the porch and he cleaned up the broken glass. He thought he was doing a friend a favor. He wasn't really thinking that they were dead. So he's cleaning that up. He kind of moves it to the back. Janelle decided to check the answering machine. The light was on, indicating that there was at least one message. Perhaps it held a clue. Instead, what sounded like an obscene message was heard on the answering machine. So now her friend Janelle is listening to this obscene message, and she deletes it and walks out of the house. Still, again, kind of erasing evidence in a way. Maybe not back for 1992, but in the future really might have been able to help them solve the case. Janelle and her boyfriend would make a couple of calls, one going to Stacy's mother, who until that point had assumed her daughter was at the water park in Branson with her friends, when she was told that the girls' cars and car keys and purses were still in the unlocked house. She ran over to the Levitt's home. She noted that her daughter's car was parked in the driveway along with the two other cars that she assumed belonged to Susie and her mother. When she looked inside, she found the house undisturbed. So she goes inside, and same as Janelle and Mike, they had cleaned up some, from accounts, they had cleaned up a little. Several Susie and Stacy's friends had also been in the house looking for them for clues of where they were, which now would have completely destroyed the crime scene if there was a crime and all that happened there, because there was, probably 30 or 40 sets of feet. I don't know how many people exactly were there. I don't think it says, but there were enough, and it was a small town, and they had a lot of friends, it seemed like. So, word travels fast in a little town. A town that is small. A town. So in Susie's bedroom, Janice McCall found her daughter's shorts and shoes. The sight of both worried her. Whatever it was, Janice thought, wherever. What are they doing? Where are they? She was just starting to panic. Janice thought she was in her t-shirt and underwear. Where would she be in her t-shirt and underwear? She immediately called her husband Stu to come to the Levitt house. Her mother's instincts had kicked in. Something was wrong, she thought, and she was right. Her daughter would not leave the house without her shorts and shoes. Why would somebody leave in just their underwear and a t-shirt and no shoes? So, when she saw Stacy's purse on the floor, she looked inside. Perhaps it held a clue to where Stacy was, she thought. She found her daughter's wallet and money, her driver's license inside. Her car keys were there too. This worried her more. Her anxiety level flew through the roof. Then this phone suddenly rang. She ran to it. arrived to end up seeing another obscene phone call. She ran out of the house and waited for her husband to arrive because something about that phone call scared the crap out of her. Late that evening, Miss Janice McCall would call the police and report her daughter missing. So finally, later that evening, they decided, okay, they didn't go to the water park and nobody else picked them up. I think that's what they were all thinking. It's a small town, they have a lot of friends. And what they thought was maybe they were at the water park. Now this kind of pissed off Janelle because she was like, well, why in the heck didn't they call me? But when she, started to realize, well, why would you go to the water park without your purse, without your car, without your keys, without your shoes, without your bathing suit? There was no sign of any of that. So now her daughter is reported missing. Why did it take so long for anyone to call the police? Well, just explain that nobody thought anything sinister happened. It was a small town, 3 women that were going somewhere the next day. It wasn't like they were just going to sleep and then she was supposed to be home by 10 a.m. Remember, they were going to be gone all day, probably till 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So, as a mom, you're thinking, though, you're not trying to think the worst. You're thinking the worst, but you're trying not to. So, she's not assuming the worst because, you don't know mother, which I do a lot. I just assume that my daughter's murdered if she doesn't come back from, skateboarding in 5 seconds. So I understand that instant panic you feel. But the disappearance like this simply didn't happen here. So, why would you think that they would happen to her daughter? There had to be some simple explanation from the whereabouts of the women. Their friends, some of their other friends expected them to show up with a logical story. They kind of all were expecting somebody else to show up with the 3 girls and say, oh yeah, sorry, we didn't bring our phones, we didn't have phones, and sorry, but because they thought they'd see him in the water park, okay, but then nobody went to the water park because of what happened, so it was kind of like, they're like, okay, we'll just wait and see if they come home. But they didn't come home. And that was very scary. So as the last hours of the day are piling up and no signs of them and no plausible explanation was coming from anybody, at least 10 people entered the Levitt house that day looking for the girls and disturbing potential evidence. So when the police are finally called, they didn't find a sign of a struggle. It was not a robbery because nothing had been stolen, or didn't appear to be. Nothing in the house appeared to have been taken. Cheryl Levitt's drawers on the dresser. This I find so bizarre. The television stereo were not stolen. Their purses were there. So he's trying to keep this coffee down. And then he says, well, my dad mentioned that there was a lady at Joe's Diner back in the 70s named Rose. Yep, that's her. So, I'm just going through this because I don't want to get too long and boring. So Rose apparently had worked at this diner and then at George's. And she had quite a following of ex-cons, dirty old men, but they all loved her. When Joe's burned down, her customers all followed her over to George's. She worked weekends, mornings most likely. I used to go in there over there every morning at 6 a.m. The day just didn't seem right, as it started off with the cover of swamp grass and smart-ass personality. So how'd she come to work for you? Well, she's only been working for me a few weeks. All restaurants and most other businesses were ordered to shut down because of the corona stuff and because business was drying up. money and I'd gotten used to her coffee. So I asked her to come work for me. Now drink your coffee, son. She'll be back in here with a refill shortly, and I don't want you to hurt her feelings. So McLean, he had oversized. He was fat. He wasn't fat, but he had an oversized belt buckle. He was big boned and muscular, and he was solid. He was an intimidating man. Follow me, he said to Brian. Followed him to another room. The door was locked. He pulled out a key and unlocked the door. He flipped on the light. Inside, all four walls were covered with combinations of whiteboards and corkboards and 16 boards, 8 of each. The whiteboards were completely filled with notes. Almost every space in the corkboards were filled with yellow post-it notes with strings going from one to another to tie different events together. Brian looked at the room in shock and said, "What? I've never seen anything like this." "Son, it's my war room. It's where I solve cases. Everything written or posted on these boards right now is information about Springfield 3. Brian's heart was pounding. He didn't know whether it was from the coffee or what the man was saying, but 16 huge whiteboards filled with just connections to all these 3 girls and 30 years of research. So, okay, but can you give me the condensed version of the case? Just tell me what happened to the women and who did it." Brian said stupidly, I don't know why he'd say that. He said, "Damn, son, you're just like your dad, always wanted to cut to the chase. I thought you wanted to report and be an investigative reporter." "Yeah, well, I was, sort of. I do want to investigate this case, though," Brian said. "Well, that's hard work, and there's no shortcuts. The answers are in there, so get busy. When you get done reading them, we'll talk again. There's thousands of notes in there. It will take me all night." "Yeah, I figured you're right. I'll have Rose make you another pot of coffee and bring you in a cot. When you get too tired or need more, just lie down and take a nap. Although if you drink that pot of coffee Rose is going to make for you, I doubt you need to sleep for a week. So just keep that in mind." I said, "Wait, are you serious? You're just going to leave me in here until I read all these notes?" I said, "Yeah, that's right." Brian didn't know what to say. There were thousands and thousands of notes. One event led to another, tied to 2 other events, tied to 4 other events. In some cases, they were grouped together. "You'll understand once you get started, son. So get to it." Apparently, he had no choice. The man closed the door and locked it from the other side. He said the door on the opposite side of the room is a bathroom. Inside's a cabinet. There are some cookies and dried prunes that'll keep you held over at least till morning. Brian didn't really know what to do, to be afraid or to just start reading, but before he could say anything or think anything else, Booker turned around and said, "One last thing, son. I need to lock the door with you inside," which Brian already knew. "I can't take a chance any of these notes leaving here. I trust you understand." "Sure, whatever happens in the case of a fire emergency." "Well, there's a window and a fire escape. Thanks. What about my clothes?" "They look okay to me. Now I mean my clothes at the motel." "Well, unless you want to sleep in your clothes, you better make a quick drive out there and pick them up. While you're there, you may as well check out. There's no sense in wasting your money. You can come bunk here until you're ready to leave. Here, we're on the floor. No, we have a cot." Brian didn't know what to do. He was like, okay, he took a shower and ate some real food because he knew he was going to stay and he'd be there after looking at those notes for days, maybe even weeks. information than anybody had ever had before on the Springfield Three, and that those rumors could be put to rest and the truth could be told. So he got the hell out of there, out of his Motel 6 hotel room. The streets were bare because of the pandemic. A few minutes later, he pulled a space of Booker's warehouse, grabbed his suitcase from the trunk, locked his car, and headed inside from the side entrance. Booker looked amused when Brian walked into the office. "What's that you're carrying?" "It's my suitcase." "What about it?" "It's cherry red." "So, well, I just don't see many men with bright red suitcases around here." He said it was on sale. "My wife got it for me," Brian said. "If you say so, son." Anyway, so now Booker leaves with a grin, and he said, "Rose will be waiting for you, so if you need anything, just holler." "Where are you going?" "I've got to get home, get my beauty sleep, but I'll be back first thing in the morning." "Sleep tight, Cinderella." So with that, he leaves the room, and Brian is now locked in this room with possibly the most accurate and detailed investigation of the Springfield Three that anybody had ever seen. Of course, Brian wondered if this man wasn't a crazy, but there were clues. Each wall titled with headings like clues, facts, and suspects. Colored strings were tied from one tied to another, indicating they were grouped together, that they had a significance when tied together. Yellow sticky notes dotted all three walls to indicate a thought or an idea that he had from time to time. Each wall was blanketed with details. Blanketed. It was like working a puzzle with several groupings of pieces, but no discernible frame to put them all together. McLean's system of presenting the case on this wall was organized chaos. That's me. Perhaps Rose's response to Brian's question was right. He was crazy. The door opened, brought a fresh pot of coffee, egg salad sandwich. He said, "Cookies and dry prunes aren't exactly a meal, so thanks, Rose." She said, "Okay, here's my phone in case there's an emergency. Here's my phone number in case there's an emergency," and walked away. The door closed and locked behind her, and there he was, left alone, with the memories of the case he had from 1992. Something about the paper, the clippings, reading the names, brought it all back as if he were there, like it was yesterday. Kohler 10, KSPR 33 were a buzz with stories and updates. So those were the radio stations back then. Southwest Missouri couldn't get enough. Soon billboards were popping up all over town. The three faces were around every corner within time. If you walked into a consumer market at Get In Go Boatman's Bank, you saw three women's pictures on their front doors. In the days before Facebook and Twitter, this was how the word got out. But somebody must have seen something. It was also ironic and sad. They were everywhere and nowhere at the same time. People in that area 28 years later had still disheartened. They were known and loved. They family workers. There's no suspects. 28 years later, Brian just shook his head. No one was ever charged with kidnapping or murder. The women's fates may have been sealed before anyone even knew they were gone. For survivors like Janice Stu McCall, there are two crosses to bear: the loss and the not knowing. How can one grieve like that? So what happened? Some believe the police made a lot of mistakes. That might be fair, but it's easy to pass the blame, pass the buck. No one knew what the real deal was at the time. How could they? The two police officers responded to the 11 alone. Late on that evening of June 8th, did a general search of the premises, took statements, wrote an incident report, and left a note on the front door. What else would they be supposed to do? At that time, you have to remember, think about So, there was no visible evidence. Jewelry, $900. The house was in order. No sign of a struggle. They took the broken glass out inside the light fixture, but the light was on. Family members and friends walked through the house. They cleaned it up. But they didn't know they were in fact cleaning up a crime scene. No one was certain any crime had even been committed, because nothing had ever happened in that town ever before. Nothing the two officers saw that night in 11 home resembled a struggle. Nothing. That was so odd. All their cars were there. Their cigarettes were there. There was no blood, no other footprints, no bizarre footprints. But there'd been so many people that walked around the house and had cleaned up the scene, but still, there was enough that strange work boots or something out of the ordinary. It seemed like the kids were all wearing like flip-flops and stuff like that because they were going to Branson and they were going to go swimming. So I'd imagine most of the kids or people that came were not wearing like heavy work boots. So if there was any, there must not have been any of that. Initially, everyone thought they had a good explanation. The women had gone. One doesn't want to assume the worst. They all thought their family or friends were at the Waterbury having a good time. However, optimism always fades quickly when people don't appear again. Nearby neighbors didn't hear or see anything out of the ordinary. The family dog was in the house. No one recalled him barking. Now, doesn't that sound odd? Because my dog, especially my two chihuahuas, they never bark. My Italian Greyhound, she'll bark. She's very protective. But the other ones are older and they don't bark much. But if somebody comes into the house and they don't, like especially Chance, my little male chihuahua, if he feels any negative vibes from them, he'll attack them, and especially if they're not supposed to be there. But that didn't happen. Cinnamon, he looked anxious, but he wasn't hurt. By most accounts of gravity, the situation became clear the morning of June 8th, and the women still had not contacted anyone. Where had they gone? Where had they done? No turning back the clock. The critical first 48 hours were gone. There was no way the press rewind on the unfolding nightmare to keep people out of the home, to undelete any obscene message. It's easy to forget when you're looking back, but in 1992, DNA evidence was in its infancy. Cell phones were rare. The girls were texting and leaving a digital footprint. There was no video surveillance, cameras nearby. Police relied heavily on fingerprints and good old-fashioned investigation. They took evidence from the house. There were everyone had been there. This was the foundation for the case, but if they get evidence at the home, though the story of their disappearance, it wasn't clear. The FBI was contacted June 9th, so they quickly got involved. They, of course, weren't talking about what evidence they found. Much has been debated about what investigators knew and did not know. Like I said, you never know. Someone coming forward might have their story corroborated by things only someone involved or a key witness might know. But since no arrests were made, the public and police can only assume there simply hasn't been enough evidence to bring anyone responsible to justice. But that isn't always the case. Sometimes they have a bigger case. Like say it was a serial killer. But it was strange. What I find very strange is that it was almost as if they were airlifted out of the house. How can these three strong women who had been known to make a scene torches? Did the waitress poison him? Did she know those 3 men? You start thinking about what could have happened. She was desperate for money. I don't know. The guys could have offered her 50 grand, 100 grand. Who knows? I don't know. This is all speculation because it was like they were airlifted into a spaceship and disappeared, which is so mind-boggling to so many people. So, I mean, everybody in the United States, America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries. If there was a show, they had Springfield 3 on it. If there was a book, it was written about it. If there was an ASMR, channel, it was spoken about. If there was a true crime channel, it was spoken about. If there was a podcast, it's spoken about. People are always trying to get a different perspective. Maybe bring one clue into this that Booker had not found or thought about, but something about the fact that everything, their clothes were there, they'd washed their faces, they'd gotten into bed, and then peeked out the window and poof, air, literally had just been gone. So hundreds, if not thousands of tips poured in, of course, in the early days of the investigation. Among them, one led authorities on June 14th to begin a sweep of the wooded areas near Springfield, near the streams and wooded areas of Springfield. Investigation also searched an apartment building not far from the Levitt home. The searches were prompted by a note left in a newspaper rack at a local grocery store. It said, "Use ruse of gas, man checking for leak." Was left the note by someone that was involved in the woman's disappearances, or by playing some sort of sick joke. The tip seemed to lead nowhere. Another early development. Many followed it. Reports, potential witness spotted a silver green 1964 to 1970 Dodge panel van at around 6:30 a.m. on the morning of June 7th. The witness claims Susie Streeter was driving, looked distraught, and heard a man who had been giving commands from the back seat say, "Don't do anything stupid." But that was not her personality. So I have a hard time believing this. I really, really do. Nearly a month after the women went missing, well, the police must have believed it was a credible lead. They were puzzled as to why witnesses didn't come forward sooner. That's exactly what I was thinking. The witness reportedly hadn't seen the missing persons flyer for weeks. The police, how can you not? Come on. The police did get the word out, though. They went to the trouble of parking a similar van outside the police department on Chestnut Expressway and asked anyone who might have seen the van or knew someone that owned a similar one to contact the police. One online post was made in 2014 by an unknown source. May explain why police latched on to the theory that the silver green or moss green van was involved. The potential witness, a man, came forward to report he was driving home from a friend's house around 3 a.m. on the morning of June 7th when he heard an alarming encounter with a fast-moving van near the Levitt home. The man was shared his story in the comment section on the website websleuths.com. She said he got a good view of the driver and even met with the detective just days after the disappearance. The Springfield police, according to the man's comment, took down his name and contact information but never followed up with him again. So plaster on Booker's board. It's just all these pages, and some of them have just found this page and decided to toss a little spice into the mix. 22 years ago, I was driving home from a friend's house around 3 a.m. I was heading west on Grand Street as I approached the little side street of the few houses down from the Streeters that crosses over the Grand. A van came peeling out onto the Grand, going left west. The driver blew through his stop sign and ran me off the road. A few days I noticed a news broadcast on 3MW, and asked me to come down immediately. He did, and insisted he had a clear look at the driver. He asked if police had any pictures or sketches. The police told him no. When I paused, dumbfounded, the detective stood up and motioned towards the door and thanked me for coming in. This was approximately 3 days after the abduction. I left my contact info and nobody ever called me back. I moved across country years later and the case was still unsolved. After noticing responding to an ad on Craigslist asking for any information, South Casey talked to the private investigator after to help see lineup of past possible suspects. One picture stopped him dead in his tracks. For the first time in 22 years, I look into the face of the driver that ran me off the road that night. I just got chills through my body, like a ghost had walked through me. The incident was so quick and violent that he had said it caused his little girl to fly out of the back seat and slam into the other seat, throwing her onto the floor. I will never forget my look on the man's face. He said the picture he picked out was Gary Hall. Gary is the twin brother of a convicted serial killer, Larry Hall. Originally from Wabash, Indiana, the brothers were Civil War buffs and were known to travel the Midwest participating in reenactments. They may have just done that at Wilson Creek battlefield in the past, and Gary frequented the Springfield area because he drove a delivery truck. I told them it was an older model van with 2 front windshields, meaning it seemed down the middle. Just seems strange that the very same description of the van that I reported 22 years ago, 3 days after the crime, and still the detectives refused to listen to me. So this man is saying he saw them, but nobody seems to care. Why? Why aren't the detectives reaching out? Why? He keeps writing on all these blogs, like, he's on Craigslist and he's writing, he goes into the police department and he's trying to make this, and they're like, yeah, well, we don't have a sketch, have a great day. But they never ask him to do a sketch. Again, telling them he could put a face with a name, but he said he just was shut down and ignored. He said he retained and the information in his mind like it happened yesterday, and he remained certain that Gary was a driver and believed someone else might have been in the back restraining the women because there was his daughter. He had almost been hit by the van to the point where he had whipped around so hard his daughter went flying from the front to the back seat, hitting the back seat. That is a hard turn, okay? Think about that. Think of it. You're in that car and your tiny little 3-year-old just goes flying into the back. You're never going to forget that. You're never going to forget the look on that driver's face. So there's a black curtain separating the front of the vehicle from the back, and didn't see more. Continued from 214 Post. Then I hear that Larry Hall, sitting in prison for life, makes it known that his brother Gary was indeed involved in the crime. Along with a family member and friends, authorities waited days before sending a detective to speak face to face with Larry to officially document what he had to say. He said he believed investigators and a woman detective to follow the lead, and Larry had a change of heart, implicating his brother after that. Larry would officially claim it all had been a dream, and he was mistaken. The man said Larry's recanting was suspect because he believes that when inmates lie about a case for attention, they tend to stick with that lie and not later claim they were dreaming. Usually when they lie, they stick with their story as long as they can for the ongoing attention they crave. He said he thought implicating his brother in the crime was Larry's way of trying to get back at him after they had a falling out. And while Larry was trapped behind bars around that time, Larry and Gary's mother had died, which had led to a change of heart. Whatever the reason, Larry said his brother wasn't involved. So the man who claimed to have witnessed what may have been a quick getaway on June 7th never felt his story got the attention it deserved. And maybe that's why he changed behind how the police, when they're wrong, they don't like to be like in the last case. I'm so furious about it. I can't stop talking about it. So I'm not going to get off on that rant, but we're going to delve into this story. This is part one, but I'm going to leave you with this. If his brother is a serial killer, his twin brother, and he knew that his brother, who wasn't a killer, was driving, but was an accomplice, he would know that there was no reason to put him behind bars. That would not be the place for him. That is why I think he recanted his story, because he knew somebody could corroborate it. Just a thought from ASMR Jody, all true crime, because somebody who got the girls was a professional, but he had to have help. There were 3 of them, and I'll tell you, one really drunk, and one mama who's gonna be really pissed, who's very aware, is not gonna be an easy target unless somebody was hiding inside, and might have been helped by those 3 men. You don't know if 2 of those 3 men, or one of those, or they were just paid off to keep the girls' attention while they snuck into the house. You don't know. Unfortunately, you will never know who is involved, because there was no evidence, but police do not like to be wrong, just like prosecutors. And I say this, and I know people will hate me for this, but there are great prosecutors, and then there are ones that I really distrust. And I have walked out of a courtroom, looked at one and said, I don't know how you can sleep at night, and turned to walk away from her, and she just called me an effing bitch, and I was like, you can call me whatever you want, but I know when I go to sleep, I can live with myself. And I turned and walked away. So there are decent prosecutors who will find the truth and just the truth. Then there's others that are going for the win, and that's all they want is the win. Now, and then there are very good prosecutors. So I'm not saying, so don't get mad at me if you're a prosecutor. If you're not one of those, then you don't have, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the ones that they're serendipitously absorbed. I don't know. It's just a certain, I can see them when they come into the courtroom. I can just tell by the look in their eyes. So I will leave you with Brian. The investigative reporter is in the room with these thousands of leads, thousands of notes, thousands of ideas running through his head. He was jumping from article to pictures to notepad scribbles, trying to soak it all in, trying to make some sense of this. When things, cases appear on America's Most Wanted, when they appear on Unsolved Mysteries, that show has done us so much good. But sometimes it feels I'm losing my voice. So it is a great show, and it does a lot of good. And there's always enormous response, but sometimes I think airing something like that will bring back memories, and that may be distorted. And maybe some fabricated fabricated ones, fantasized ones, everything is so much worse than it is after, you've had time, people have had time to kind of make up their own endings, and things that they think they saw become real, and that was not the truth. You gotta get it right then. That's why the 48 hours are the most important. And they lost that 48 hours. So, like I said, after that TV show aired, it was like a blessing and a curse, because so many people responded, but they gave them information that wasn't necessarily the best, if you know what I mean. So, I hope you all have a good night, and I will see you tomorrow. Take a deep breath and relax. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for being there with me today and listening to my story. I feel like it's a family out there listening, and I get to be part of your family. So, thank you for all your likes. Please subscribe so I can subscribe back. That's what I usually do. I love to, tie us all together. I love to feel like a family. I just believe if we are together and to stick together, we can do much more than we could by ourselves. So we should all help each other. I just want to shout out to Geekwares. Sean, you're doing a great job. I listen to your stories. I love the stories. They're awesome. And of course, I listen to Geekwares because I love her. She's so cute. When she goes on she has a bad day, and she just is so cute. It just goes on. I just feel like it's a family forever. She had a picture on Instagram, and she's lying there looking at like it's 3 in the morning. I'm still awake. I don't know what to do with myself, and that's how I feel all the time. Like, do some ASMR. I literally will do a reading and put myself to sleep, and I will listen to it the next day and go, what was I talking about? So, I just love ASMR. I think from mental health, my dad listens to it now, and since my mom died, he really had a hard time sleeping. He just goes to sleep to the sound of my voice or to the sound of others, that I have listed on my channel, which makes me feel good. I want to. That's really what I was hoping what you would do, because, I was getting worried about him not sleeping, the Levitt house had clearly not been robbed. Why wouldn't the killer take the $900 Cheryl had, or the jewelry, or the cars, or the keys, or something? Investigators had very few to go on. I mean, anything that would have had fingerprints on them would have been contaminated, because so many people had come into the house that day. People had cleaned up, some moved some things around, everyone left fingerprints. One of the potentially obvious clues, the broken light cover on the front porch, was swept up and thrown away because, remember, Janelle's boyfriend didn't want her to cut her feet, and thought that he didn't want anybody else to cut themselves either, because at that point they thought they were sleeping. And maybe they're thinking that Susie or Cheryl were drunk, or it hit it and it fell because the light wasn't broken. You would think, that's the only sign of a struggle, I guess, because you would think that if somebody hit it that hard that it fell off and broke, they'd also break the light. Or if somebody was trying to break in and didn't want them to see them, they would break the light and not that. You know what I mean? So, the obscene message left on the machine was deleted. The open curtain in Susie's room had been touched and closed. An uneaten graduation cake in the refrigerator with the words "Congrats, Suze" was a reminder that the celebration just a day before. And how quickly things had changed. And that is how it always happens. But the women were gone, so no one wanted to believe that a crime had been committed in their small town. So they were very, very disturbed and distraught. The three women disappearing from the home in the middle of the night. No, it just could not be. It could not happen in their small town. People would not accept that. But no one heard anything. The family dog was loose in the house. The home was set back from the road quite a bit, but the neighbors were not too far. Some would have heard something. Someone would have heard anything if somebody had taken them against their will. You had three very strong-willed women that obviously were not completely asleep when they were taken. So what? I always tell my daughter, scream as loud as you can, make as much noise as you can. I guarantee you, Janelle, by all accounts, Cheryl, by all accounts, was not a quiet, laid back, just take it person and be quiet. And I don't think Susie was either. And honestly, I don't think Stacy would have let anybody just take her. So panic starts to swell within the family and the community. It would, if nothing ever happened, like my mom, she grew up in this tiny little town in Ohio, and it was just like, even when I was a kid, I'd go by myself at 5, 6, 7 years old and just walk through the cornfields for hours by myself and go up to the school, which is right up the street, and swing on the swings. Nobody even thought about coming with me when I was little, really little, because even if I got hurt, they could hear me crying. That's how close. It was just, even in the cornfields, that echo would travel a long way because it was so flat. So that is the kind of town I'm thinking this is. That very similar to my mom's town. That was so. We walked to the post office, we walked to church, we walked to, everywhere down the street to the school. We walked everywhere. The other girls, they were feeling like the friends were gonna come home. The police left a blue note on the front door his world. He had been a sports editor for his high school paper, which, among other perks such as covering key football and basketball games, allowed him to write his own column. Brown's bag. Brian always liked writing. His senior year, he would be editor-in-chief in the high school paper. He had finished his spring soccer league, and the Vikings team looked like it would be a good fall for them. He even said, "We might even beat Kickapoo this year," he said when he arrived in St. Charles in early June for a summer vacation with his dad. Alan Brown, Brian's father, had been meeting Brian's mother in Rollo when he and his younger son Justin came to stay. At the time, Alan was married to Marcia, who had 2 daughters of her own, as well as a son they had together. Brian and Justin would typically visit over the Christmas holiday and then for 2 months during the summer break. This year was different. It was 1992 and Brian was turning 17. He had a car now and did not want to spend the whole summer with his dad. So not cool, right? Brian, the oldest son, was growing up, but the plan was for him to stay for a couple of weeks and return to his job at Brian's Steakhouse in Springfield. It would be years later before Alan would know that he had already left his job. It was just an excuse for him to return early. Alan was working a lot. His second marriage was strained. Brian didn't want to be away from his friends for too long. For Alan, that summer was uneventful. For Brian, it was much different. He was coming of age. He was becoming a young man. There was no turning back. Life is funny like that. It only goes in one direction, and that is so true. What Alan didn't know at the time, and would learn much later, that there was a big case that had developed that summer in the boys' hometown. 3 women had gone missing without a trace in the middle of the night, and from a nice neighborhood in the heart of the city, breaking the city's heart. Brian would tell his dad years later, back then everyone knew someone who had a theory or connection to the girls. The way I heard it, there was a server at George's and she was sure she'd waited on the mom and the 2 girls. Susie and Cheryl. His daughter was Cheryl. And Cheryl's daughter was drunk and she wanted to sober the daughter up. I knew a guy, Ryan, who was friends with the buzzer at George's. This buzzer said that he doesn't remember the girls coming in, though. Everyone, he said, was drunk at George's. That's what I said earlier, because it was a party night. It was, yeah, we graduated. Let's have fun. It's a little town. That's what they do. They drink. I'm sorry, my lips are so dry tonight. So, especially if they were talking about being there after 1 a.m. Brian told his dad that he understood the server had an interesting story all the girls had known, admitting that it was much harder to know how much he heard was reliable. Alan had always been fascinated by unsolved cases. He'd even written about a couple, and a slowdown in the family's direct mail business in late March of 2020 had given the father time on his hands to talk about some of their favorites for unsolved cases. For someone from Springfield, it was a case that the missing woman was the ultimate unsolved case. His dad recalled seeing a couple of them shows about them, but he didn't remember much about the 3 missing women. "Look, memories are funny things," Brian said with a chuckle. "They're not to be trusted, especially if they are old. They change with time, particularly if you're not an active participant in what's going on. If someone tells you a story, you can imagine it playing out in your mind, but the details aren't fixed as if they happened to you personally." And that's what I always try to say. Think like it's happening to you personally. What would you be doing in that situation? Because I think that helps any investigator, any people looking for an unsolved mystery to be solved, because we are all humans and we're creatures of habit. We all, brush our teeth. We have our little routines, brush our teeth, wash our face, get our makeup off, we're giggling, we're talking to our friends, and we're in high school, and we're like, because what will happen? What happens? You get acne and nobody wants a pimple. Oh my God. You know, God forbid. So you really have to think about what they were doing. So sometimes I think people's ideas get flawed by what others say, and they don't stop to think about what really might have happened. The more you internalize a story and can make subtle changes to it without realizing it, just with the way people explain it to you, or have account like, oh, you know, I knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. I'm sure we've all heard that. I've heard that story a million times. Oh, I knew a guy who knew a guy. You know, who knew if that even was true? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. That's why hearsay is not allowed in court. I was told about this server almost 30 years ago, and I can't remember her name, but for simplicity's sake, we'll just say it's Jane. Okay, so this guy, same with the buzzer, just let's call him Alex, whatever. And in my mind, right or wrong, they were possibly keys to this whole case, but nobody else had seen the girls there. This is what I find strange, is that he's saying a lot of people were there. I understand they were drunk, but, you know, somebody wasn't all that drunk. I never drank, so I was always chatting with everybody. I'd be going around. Maybe that's why I'm not that social now, because when I was younger, I was a social butterfly. But Jane Bryan said was a young single mother in her early 20s. So she was the waitress. She fell in love with her high school sweetheart, married 2 months out of high school, and divorced 15 months later. Her husband deserted her 3 months into her pregnancy. Jane was an attractive woman, blonde hair, blue eyes, tall and thin, with a bubbly smile, and very outgoing personality. On the outside, she looked like someone that had the world in her hands, but during the lonely hours of the night, Ben had seen a different side of her. So what, Alex. They use Ben, I use Alex. So I wrote it down twice differently. That does not surprise me. So Alex, the buzzer, had seen something that nobody else had seen. From what Brian had heard, the waitress's life was a struggle. The money she made from serving barely paid her bills. Her mother helped her any way she could, but she always had challenges. Now this waitress's dad had passed away 3 years earlier, and her mother's health had just started to deteriorate. So they were living on, unable to work and living on Social Security. Her mother moved in with her for 6 months earlier. So Jane found herself taking care of her mother as well as a 3-year-old daughter. There wasn't time to date. College was a fantasy now. Her friends had gone on to other places. She had never felt more alone. At the time all this happened, in the middle of the night, when no one was around and the loneliness weighted on her was too much to bear, the buzzer could see the sadness in her eyes, and he could hear the shakiness of her voice as she fought back the tears. She took the night shift 6 months earlier, so she could be home to care for her daughter and mother during the days. So Brian had said at night both were asleep and less likely to need her. Besides, her mother was not completely immobile. She was capable of taking care of her daughter's basic needs, particularly after bedtime. George's Steakhouse was a 24-hour restaurant known to most locals of Springfield. They served breakfast at all hours of the night and morning. Large portions, plenty of grease, and strong black coffee, perfect for late-night partiers and early morning risers. It was a popular hangout for students and longtime residents alike that night. Saturday, June 6th was particularly busy, and the first half of the buzzer's shift was very, very busy. Kickapoo High School had their graduation ceremonies earlier that day, and graduation parties meant a lot of people were out partying late into the night, celebrating and having a blast, drinking, and George has had his staff of only 3 cooks and 4 servers till around 2 when things slowed down. never saw the guys, just the waitress. He thought he remembered hearing them when he was in the back, but he was cleaning up, so he was making noise himself. But remember Jane, the waitress's description of them. They were dirty, nasty, they made rude sexual comments. Maybe boned the women at the house a couple times. Too bad that Janelle had erased that, recording the first one, because it could have been a huge clue as to who this was. These guys talked to her. She would have been able to identify them. Identify them. One of them grabbed her legs and started rubbing it up and down, and she was worried they were going to do something to her, so now she's getting this weird sick feeling in her stomach, like, oh my god, what do I do? That's when the three women walked in. Brian said. She said she was never so happy to see some customers. They pretty much left her alone after that, but she supposedly could see them looking at those women. It wasn't a glance, more like a stare. She didn't think the women noticed these guys, and these guys were just looking at them and looking at them the entire time. Brian said the waitress, had recognized Cheryl and they were friendly. They ordered some breakfast, but they didn't stay long, maybe 30 minutes. Jane assumed, she wanted to get some coffee into Susie and just get her home and get her to bed. Basically, but what happened was, after they left, which seemed totally normal, okay, now they're gonna go home to bed, the men left 10 minutes after them. Maybe that's when they made that phone call, I don't know. But while Jane was cleaning up the table, she noticed Cheryl and the girls were also talking to the creepy guys outside, so why were they still there? Susie must have been so obliterated that she couldn't get her in the car for some reason. Maybe they had a fight. I'm trying to think of what would make me wait outside of a restaurant at 2 in the morning, because I'm a true crime addict, so I'm thinking about people and what they may do to me at all hours of the day. So I'm in my car, I'm locking it, and I'm out of there. But I could see, when I was younger, my friends that would get drunk and they would just start these fights out in the parking lot. I'm thinking, what are we fighting about? What are you mad about? I saw you looking at this guy, he wanted me. Just stupid stuff. So when people are drunk, they don't always make the best decisions. So they are talking to these creepy guys, as she recalls. But like Brian, who writes this, he says, memories are a funny thing. Through the grapevine, things get distorted. Maybe that never even happened, because that's a long time to be in the parking lot. So that was when the news of the three women who disappeared spread all over the town and beyond. Well, that's really interesting. Alan said, yeah, so that's his father talking. Eventually Jane would see the three missing women and recall that night. See the three that they were missing and, recall that night. Then she talked about it with the buzzer, about it with him, and she'd spoken to investigators. Soon those same investigators would come in to talk to the buzzer and ask him about the early morning hours of June 7th. But he didn't recall much. He was in the back cleaning up, and he later would see news reports that referred to a server from George's without using her name as being a possible witness. He always wished he would have paid more attention to everything that night, but what can you do now? Even important days usually just look like all the others, and that is very, very true. So Brian would go to Southwest Missouri State fall of 1993, drop out, and then return a decade later to get that degree in journalism. So now he's writing this. He was pursuing, and life moved on as it always had, and like it always does. He says, it still bugs me. I left for a couple of weeks wants to understand what happened. I think the world, anybody in the world who has heard of this case, they cannot grasp their head around that everything looks so normal. It's like they got in a spaceship and disappeared, and there was no footprints, there was no struggle except for the little bit of glass and then the strange phone call. But that wasn't all that odd back, when we had landline phones. I remember getting them as a kid and just being like, whatever, you can creep him, Alan and Brian talked about the son and the father had talked about the case quite a bit in late March and early April. So the world had flipped on its head by the middle of the third month of the year with the coronavirus in the U.S. Everything had changed. Longtime clients with their marketing campaigns on hold. The NCAA tournament had been canceled. Filling out brackets had been a favorite annual tradition for Alan and Brian, and the NBA and Major League Baseball season was postponed too. It was a time of quarantine, social distancing, and great uncertainty, which we can all relate to as I'm speaking. For Alan and Brian, this mystery from 28 years ago was becoming suddenly important because they had all this time on their hands and they could really dig into articles and blogs and be dedicated to it. They all had good information, some more than others, Alan said. Brian, who had worked as a business and political reporter for several years in Springfield, never had a reason to cover the story. Now he wished he had. I wish I could remember more. It was all so long ago, Brian said. I really don't have any desire to be a journalist again, but I'd love to investigate the case, really drive into it and interview some people. Alan cautioned his son, there's a reason it's never been solved. The FBI has resources, manpower, and technology you don't, and they have been involved since the very beginning, and if they haven't found anything out, then what makes you think you will? Women are arrested, a single suspect now. So, they haven't found the bodies or they haven't arrested one suspect, the FBI. So there's just not enough evidence anywhere. But Dad, Brian says, someone has got to know what happened to those women. Maybe the police have their minds made up and they're wrong. He sounds like me. Alan had seen this before. He knew, when you see it happen before, you start to question everything, and then you see it happen again and again. I was never a reporter, an investigative reporter, but I was an investigator, so you do see things like this happen, and you're just like, something's missing. Alan was reminded of the Lake Honor case and how he couldn't let that go either. He thought to himself, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Son, I know a guy you should talk to. He's a colorful character, his father said. Booker McLean is a straight shooter who will drive you mad and take you down every dark alley and dead-end road of a case, but he has a wealth of information unsolved. Cases in the Ozarks are kind of his whole thing. I'm sure this is one he'd know a lot about. It would be a good place to start. Oh yeah, he's the one who helped you investigate those murders at the College of the Ozarks, right? Sure, I'd like to interview him, Brian said. In April, Alan's small family business is struggling. The father and son have been doing what they could. I'm just trying to give you a little different perspective here on the three. This is from investigative journalists, really dug into the case very recently. This is in September 2021. So, things relaxed and life got back to normal. Alan thought it could be a good time for his son to take a trip to Springfield. The timing is pretty bad right now, Alan told Brian, but most places are closed. It's been a lot of years since I've even spoke to Booker. I can't believe his name is Booker. I'm gonna say Booger, but it's Booker. I think I don't even know how to spell Booker. Like, that's not a word out from the 70s. "Why don't you phone him?" Alan said as he came upstairs and looked in his old filing cabinet. Alan said as he came back downstairs holding a scrap of paper where he'd written down a number. "I'm not finding this guy yet," Brian said, staring at his computer screen. "I'll bet you'll find him here," Alan said, handing him the piece of paper with the number written on it. So, this is another typical source. This is a man that doesn't have a cell phone. He still has a landline that he's had from the 70s. So, his dad's giving him all this, investigator talk, and he's kind of laughing because he's a man now and he has his own investigative experience. But hopefully, he wanted to interview this man. He knew that this man wasn't a Zoom or Skype type. He grew up in the age way before all computers and cell phones, and he lived in a quiet little town, kind of out on the outskirts of town. He wrote notes by hand, and he assumed this man hadn't changed either. You just can't teach an old dog new tricks. You'll be lucky to get 5 minutes of his time. Alan knew that Brian would soon figure out he was going to have to go to Springfield. Brian called, but there was no answer. An answering machine recording picked up a loud, deep voice that said, "Spit it out or keep it in your mouth. I don't give a damn. If you leave your name and number, I'll delete it when I get back." So this is the kind of man Booker is. A really rough. "What kind of message is this?" Brian said. "Who is this guy?" His dad laughed. "Good luck, son." A few hours later, with Brian frustrated that he hadn't heard back from this man, Alan handed his son a second piece of paper. On it was written an address and direction and a time, 9 a.m. "What's this?" "You have an appointment with Mr. McLean tomorrow morning." Brian's eyes got widened and he looked shocked. "The address is where you'll find his office in an abandoned warehouse in the north side of Springfield. You should probably pack and leave right away, so you also want to stay a few days. At least knowing him, Mr. McLean, the interview is likely to last at least that long." He said, "Oh, well, okay, I guess." It went from almost 5 minutes to days. "Well, let's go." So Alan got in his car and he left. He's feeling a little cocky and, he's feeling pretty cool. Got a Motel 6 hotel. He called his dad. "I'm here. Did you eat something?" Da-da-da. He said, "Did you check out Joe's Diner?" Alan said, "That's where Mr. McLean and I met over 40 years ago. But there was a strip club there now." So, finding Mr. McLean's office proved to be more challenging than he thought it would be. It was off an alleyway between commercial and a division with no address or signage off the street. Soon enough, however, he noticed Mr. McLean's candy apple red 69, nice Chevy Corvette convertible, nice. I love those cars. The license plate said "Bug." I swear to God, I'm not making this up. It was a largely nondescript commercial property that appeared to be 3 or 4 stories tall. A handwritten sign on the outside of the rear door read, "McLean, Private Investigator, Suite 301. Above the door was a camera surveillance device recording every moment that anything took place outside. The place looked completely empty. The parking lot was deserted. Every store, every space was deserted. So what happened? He just turned the knob and it was locked. He knocked, a buzzer sounded, the door unlocked. He walked in, a pretty elderly lady, which surprised him. Gray hair, thinly built, with a kind, gentle smile, greeted him with a hug, which alarmed him, because he was wearing a mask, being careful about germs. She said, "Hello, you must be Brian," she said, unaware he was bothered behind Rose's desk. Brian kept his distance without being rude. He thought maybe the guy was in the bathroom. There was even a fresh vase of flowers. And also on the table was a coffee maker and a pot. He just noticed these things out of sheer investigative reporter, journalist. You get trained as an investigator to look for everything. When I walk in the room, my daughter will say, so what was on the table in the front? And I teach her to do this, You look at every little detail. What color was the shirt the people were wearing as they walked to the door? How long were the steps? Was it long stuff, short? What was the hair? How tall were they? I could describe as I walk into the bank the 5 people that walked out just before I walked in. What papers were on the desk, if there were any name cards, or if there wasn't, if there were plaques on the wall. What did the plaques say? Where did they go to college? Did they have a football or some kind of memorabilia on their desk? It's just how you become. So Dad, she really had a typewriter. I couldn't believe it. Who still uses typewriters? About 5 minutes, Rose left as if by instinct, and then came back. After a minute, smiled at Brian and said, "Mr. McLean will see you now." Mr. McLean has his own office, just as big and even more empty and dark. It was a smack in the face, but the smell of cigar and coffee, of smoke when he walked in. After a minute, it smiled at Brian and said, Behind a large oak desk sat McLean, a large, intimidating figure, bald-headed with dark, bulging eyes. He looked tired and worn, his face was fully wrinkled, and his eyebrows and bushy hair had gone gray. Behind him on a table sat a large white Stetson hat and stood to shake his hand. Brian noticed his thick, large hands were hard and like leathery baseball gloves. He wore a dress shirt, green button-down long sleeve. The 2 top buttons were undone. A hairy chest shone through. Wearing a thick gold chain around his neck, he had on jeans worn and faded. He spotted cowboy boots, freshly shined. The tips of the boots narrowed into a V shape, which made Brian wonder how his toes fit in them. "The rattlesnake skin," Mr. McLean replied, noticing Brian looking at them, just as a good reporter should. Sit down, and I'll tell you about him. So he tells him about the story about how he got him at an annual rattlesnake roundup. And Brian has what? An annual rattlesnake roundup. Yep, Booker replied, as if he should have known this, because doesn't everybody go to an annual rattlesnake roundup? No, I don't do that. But I'm not against it, so, whatever floats your boat. Every spring, so he started talking about all of these thousands of hibernated snakes that come out, and people search under rocks and holes for rattlesnakes. Afterwards, they barbecued a rattlesnake and make, stuff like boots. No, that doesn't sound great, Brian said. So, as he says this, Booker says, "You should take that fruity scarf off your face, son. If I'm sick, it won't save you," he said, continuing without hesitation. Don't you know you're missing? It tastes a lot like chicken, fresh, juicy, tender, smoked just right. You'll never forget the taste. He's talking about the barbecued rattlesnakes again. So Brian reluctantly took off his mask, knowing he'd be there for a while. So they talk about the boots. says, "Are you Alan's kid?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "That's too bad." He added with a smile, "Did you have any trouble finding the place?" he asked. He said, "No, not much." He lied. "Sure you did, son. Don't lie to me. I don't want it to be easy to find this place. Fact is, I don't just want anyone walking in on me. I made a few people uncomfortable over the years. I'd rather them not show up unexpectedly, if you know what I mean." He looked Brian over, grabbed his cup from Rose, that Rose brought him with his coffee in it, and he nodded his head as if to ask if he wanted any, and he said no. He goes, "No nonsense. You'll hurt Rose's feelings if you don't have a cup. She's been making it for me for 50 years now. Once you get used to your brew, you'll never want anything else." "Is that right, Rose?" she chatted. "I guess so, old man." She sat back. "If the first cup doesn't kill them, they always come back for more. This is why this sweet young lady is with this man, because she's just as feisty." So, they drank quick coffee. And, "She's something," Booker replied. "I've known that woman for a lot of years. She's a smartass with a heart of gold. Just don't get on her bad side. 3 ex-husbands they haven't been seen from since." Brian looked shocked. "I'm just kidding, son," Booker said with a pause. "I think it was just 2 ex-husbands." "She sure as hell makes a good cup of coffee, though. Take a sip," Booker said, raising his cup. Brian took a drink and gagged. He said later, "Dad, it was the worst coffee I'd ever had. I couldn't hide that I hated it. I really don't even mind Folgers. I don't know what the hell was in there. It was like an extra concentrated and burned. It was not good." "Son, keep it down," Booker said. Rose